Hello again. We're back looking at Visual Basic Express Edition, and this time I'm working through the sheet on logic, loops and control. Last time we looked at a console application. This time we're going to have a look at a very simple Windows form and look at some loops. And I'll give you some ideas of other things to explore as we go along. So we'll go to New Project and just wait for it to catch up. While it's doing that, my machine's a bit slow today, we can think about what loops actually mean. We'll go for the Windows Form application. Don't forget that we're giving this a name, and it's going to be loops and logic. So loops allow us to do something many times, and the typical one is the for loop, which gives us a numeric value for the number of times we've gone around the loop. So we'll do that one first. At the same time, we're looking at a Windows form, so we're going to use a form with a button and a text box. It's quite important to know what is going on behind the scenes when you click on a button, and what we're going to do here is a very easy way of creating it, but it's worth thinking about how the code works. So here is a simple form. We can resize that by grabbing the anchors down here. Again, when my computer catches up, here we go. So we can make it bigger, or not. We can make it bigger and smaller. Ours doesn't need to be very big, so I'm just going to make it that big. We want to add a button and a text box, and the way to do that is to go up to the toolbox. Now I normally work with this actually pinned in place, so if I click on that, it will now stay in place. It restricts the amount of space I've got to work on other things, but means I can actually see my tools. We could look at all the Windows Forms controls, or in this case the common controls will do fine. We're going to add a button, like that. And it's a good practice to make sure the text on the button means something useful. So here I'm going to change the text to say run loop. It's also a good idea to actually name the button appropriately. In this case, it's one of those things which they've moved in Visual Basic Express 2012. Here we go. Down the bottom. I'm used to it being near at the top. It's also a good idea to name things, so if I've got lots of buttons, I'd be able to find the right one easily. I'll just call it button loop. You notice that changes its name up here, doesn't change anything on the screen here. I'm also going to add a text box, which is down here. We'll make that more or less the same sort of size. You notice the guidelines appearing, but then it pings up. I find that mildly annoying. It looks like it should be in line with the bottom, but then the depth is different, so it doesn't. Again, I'm going to call this, give it a name, textbooks result. Typical program, and I leave out the vowels in lots of things. This doesn't need to have any text in it to start with, but if we wanted some, we could put it here. But in this case, as I say, that doesn't need to have any, so we can delete it. Right. Now, we want to add some code for this. There's a couple of ways of doing that, and it's worth being aware of them. I can just double-click on that, and it will automatically create the on-click event. But it's worth knowing that we can also look down a whole list of all the events which can apply. So we've got click, we've got when it's painted, so that's when it's drawn on the screen. If you want to do animations, that's how you do that. We can use drag and drop type manipulations. We can also use key presses, but that requires the control to be focused. It has to have the focus. And you'll see all sorts of things here. What I'm just going to do very quickly so we can see. I don't want an event. No, we won't do that. Right. Back to the properties. One of the other things I was going to do was just change the look of the button slightly, just so that we can see how it works. The system font brings in things from the theme, so it tends to have a limited selection. These are ones which are typically used on the web. It's often a good practice to use those. That's obviously not visible if I choose it, unless we then also change the background colour. So I'm going to change the background colour as well to be something dark. I've lost the nice 3D appearance by doing that, but that's okay. So that's just to show that we can change the look. In the events thing, I can double click in there as well. Gives me the button loop.click. Notice that that also takes us straight through to where the code is being written. And let's just have a quick look at the anatomy of this. I'll move that out of the way and move that a bit out of the way. We've got this thing called a public class form1. Now form1 is this. You see its title is also form1. Those two things are actually independent. I can give it a different title. Go back to properties here and click on the form itself. I can give it some text which says what I'm doing. So that's experimenting, but the form itself is still based on a class called form1. When the program runs, that class is used to create the actual form itself. This declaration here says that we are, this is just a name, button loop underscore click, it could be anything. We can actually name that whatever we like. It's a subroutine which takes an object, which is the sender, so in this case that will be sent the button, and E as event arguments, so this will take whatever values are passed to it when the button is clicked. And the key bit really for this is that it handles a specific event, and the specific event is our button, which I named button loop, and it's the click event. Now there are all sorts, we can look down here, all sorts of different events, and that's the same that we saw on the other screen. Anyway, for the moment all we want to do is change a value in the text box. So we're going to dimension a number, and we're going to make that an integer. Notice that I'm not typing in capitals, but when I press return or move on to the next word, it automatically capitalizes for us. So I don't need to worry about capitals for most things in regular Visual Basic. And then I'm going to say for num equals 1 to 10. And then we want to change the value that's in our text box. So text box result, you'll notice that it knows what I was talking about. I could click on that. I can also just press the dot, which is going to come next, and it fills in for me. Remember that sort of thing, it makes life a lot easier. Append text. Now in the sheets what we've got is ccstr of num, and I'll show you a different way of doing that in a moment, and I'll close my brackets off. We've already got the next in there because Visual Basic is kind, or the IDE is kind, and the IntelliSense fills these things in for us. Now this will run, but it won't do quite what we expected. So let's have a look. Well, probably not quite what you expected. We run it, and when we click on run loop, we get all the numbers next to each other: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so I'll stop that again. What you might want to do is explore a couple of other options. Some are listed on the sheet. One thing I'd quite like to do with this is make it so they appear on different lines. And to do that I need to make it so that it knows it's a multi-line control rather than a single line control. So multi-line here, false, make that true. Now you'll see it's the same size as that button, and I can actually make it bigger. Now it still won't actually go on one on each line at the moment. If I run that, we'll see it'll just do the same as it did before, but in a bigger box. Okay. What we'd need to do if we want those to go on separate lines, or the easiest way, is to put on this the concatenator. Oh, it's one of those moments where you forget what you're typing. There we are. VBCRLF is a constant which represents the line feed character. So I can run that again. Run loop. Ooh, it's got outside your window. Sorry. Run loop, and there they appear on different lines. If you're doing a lot of this, it's better to actually use a different construct and then add it as the text. Adding things on the ends of strings, which this effectively does, is not always a good idea. Also, Cstra is not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it. And just as an example, but just so you know, I will show you another way, which is more of the .NET way. If I do that, it should do exactly the same thing, but we're using the object-oriented nature of the programming language. So I click on Start, click on Run Loop, and there we go, it's done it again. So I'll look at the logic next time, because I've already gone for a bit longer than I planned, but have a play with creating Windows forms and creating loops.